Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we discuss the news, information, and emerging thought with leaders from across the healthcare industry. My name is Bill Russell, recovering healthcare CIO and creator of This Week in Health IT, a set of podcasts and videos dedicated to training the next generation of health IT leaders. This podcast is brought to you by Health Lyrics, helping you build agile, efficient, and effective health IT. Let's talk. Visit healthlyrics.com to schedule your free consultation. Our guest today is Darren Dworkin, the CIO for Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, and just an all-around nice guy. Good afternoon, Darren. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Bill. How are you?
Good. I'm sort of breaking the premise here of saying good afternoon. Most people think we record these in the morning, but I record them based on the schedule. And you've been pretty busy, so you just got back from HIMSS. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But one of the softball questions I throw out to start is, what are some of the things that you or your team are working on that you're really excited about right
now? There's a lot going on, which I think is no different here at Cedars than anywhere else. We are constantly juggling the ongoing optimization and maintenance work, the ongoing growth and sort of new projects, and trying to squeeze as much as we can in terms of sort of the new and the exciting. And I would say in that last category, which is generally what people sort of want to know about, we're doing a lot of stuff, really trying to understand sort of that digital frontier and really what it means to, for the first time, really think about moving maybe a little bit away from enterprise software and start to think of ourselves as in the consumer software business.
Interesting. Well, we will definitely circle back to that as part of the conversations. What I wanted to do with you, since it's still fresh in our minds and we ran into each other at HIMSS, is this is going to be the final show where we take a look back at HIMSS and hopefully put the whole event to bed. But now, just a couple of questions around HIMSS. Was there anyone's presence or absence that surprised you from this year's HIMSS show?
There was a few pleasant things. I think that we're finally seeing fewer and fewer cart vendors and sort of desktop vendors and sort of some of the things that used to sort of occupy the show floor. A lot of the usual suspects there. And I think maybe the new entrants that we're starting to see is a little bit what I alluded to, is folks that are starting to think about sort of that digital frontier and sort of that consumer piece. And so we start to see a few of those folks. I will say, though, as a CIO for a large organization that feels like we buy almost one of everything, I'm always amazed at just the sheer number of vendors that are there. And I, inevitably sort of maybe by aisle 6,000 or so, start to scratch my head and think, how could it be that all of these companies exist?
Yeah, and you're not exaggerating when you say aisle 6,000. I had a meeting at one end of the floor to the other end of the floor, and I think I put on at least 2,000 steps just doing a straight line from one end of the floor to the other. So it was pretty big. So some of the people that did have a presence, Google dramatically expanded their presence. Amazon did as well. Uber, Lyft. You saw a lot of those. We had the traditional Epic booth is, I think, the same booth, and Cerner switched up their booth a little bit, but it's about the same size. But those new digital players are starting to come in. How are you viewing that? I mean, how are you either, thinking about relationships with them? Because I know you guys have done a lot of announcements around different players like Apple and others. Although we didn't see Apple there, did we?
I don't think Apple is a big show attender.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's just one of those that was absent. But how are you thinking about those other players, the Ubers, the Lyfts, the Googles, the Amazon? I mean, do you feel like they're coming with solutions at this point? Or are they still sort of just selling the things that they have, saying, okay, we've got a lot of really great tools and we're looking for partners who are going to help us to figure out how to apply this stuff?
Well, listen, it's a big group that you described. I sort of have to put them in a bunch of categories. I think the Uber and Lyfts are easy to pair up against each other. I think they are, I get the sense they're still trying to decide do they want to be a service provider to startups that will build on their platform, or do they want to build their own software tools and directly integrate? I think for now, the answer is probably yes, as they're trying to sort of figure out what that means. And, since I started with them, I'll pick on them first, and I'll say that they are probably winding themselves through the journey of, wow, healthcare is a really big market, let's jump in. And then somewhere in those first early stages of the journey, one realizes that, a little bit more complicated, more nuanced. I've gotten to row 6,000 and realized there's a lot of people to integrate with. And I think they're going to have to make a decision soon of how deep they really want to get into the vertical, or whether they want to be sort of a supplier to it. Some of the other ones that you mentioned, I think they're such big organizations that they also subdivide. So Amazon, it's hard to talk about them as one thing. AWS and our approach towards using AWS, we're big fans and we're big users of AWS, I think is sort of one category. Amazon has made a few moves and sort of, it's been alluded to a bunch of moves in terms of how they may play a role in the supply chain. For all of the big tech vendors that are talking about disrupting, I have to say personally, I can't wait for Amazon to disrupt the supply chain. I think it's one of those things that will benefit health systems, providers, and ultimately patients by bringing down costs. There's an awful lot of people that touch things on their way to the patient, and there's an awful lot of cost that gets added to that. With no inside fantastical knowledge, I would say that Amazon would be great in the DME space. They would be great in sort of some of those areas that, traditionally, needed some disruption. Obviously, there's lots of rumors with their PillPack acquisition and what they may do in sort of the PBM space, but I think that's sort of, wide open. And then the third category for Amazon is around, what they're doing with voice and Alexa, and I think that sort of represents sort of another area. And then, finally, some pretty exciting announcements from them around medical comprehend and what they may do in sort of NLP. So, it's different strategies with different things. But what we're trying to do is get focused on the things that we can make use of right now. And probably everybody likes the word, so I'll use it. The best disruption that we can take advantage of with Amazon right now is really leveraging as much as we can in the cloud. And frankly, in that area, it's not even the most exciting things. Some of our biggest projects in the cloud is to look at the myriad of legacy systems we have that we have to maintain for various regulatory reasons or other sort of complicated scenarios, and seeing if we can sort of move those and just reduce the cost of operating. So, it varies. And similar sort of story with Google, similar story with Apple, similar story with Facebook, and on and on and on.
Yeah, they are really big companies, and you have all the benefits of the scale and the resources that they're bringing, but you also have, they're big companies and they're silent. For all the appearance from the outside that it's, a single entity growing in the same direction. Anytime you put 100,000 people in an organization, they tend to form silos and head off in different directions. So sometimes it can be hard to navigate those companies and how you get the best results out of them. I mean, that's been my experience. Has that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. And I think that, frankly, a lot of times these companies are coming to market in as much of an experimentation mode as early stage companies. And we sometimes just confuse, because they're so big and because they're so well capitalized, that they must know everything. And I think that, they have an amazing capacity to learn and to invest resources, but, they're very much sort of feeling their way around the ecosystem. And I think, the interesting part is that those vendors that are in healthcare and sort of the anchor tenants of the HIMSS floor that we were referring to, they've long learned that healthcare is not one thing. And, it might be easy to say that it's this $1 trillion market that you're going to sort of enter, but, you start by dividing it into pharma and payers and providers. And then, we love to focus on the provider side, but then you take the provider side and you put it into hospitals and sort of the rest of the system. Then you take a look at hospitals and you split out academics and you split, sort of the community hospitals. And then if that wasn't bad enough, you have to start looking at sort of what core systems they have, and they'll have a different IT approach if they're an Epic shop or a Cerner shop or a Meditech shop or an Athena shop. And so, the hard thing for these companies is they're used to launching businesses that move in big blocks and are $1 billion in market size and, can move their needle. Once you start breaking it down, I think that what they start to realize is that it's not always as interesting as it appeared. And while they still maybe want to play a role, I think that they often realize there's maybe a better role for them to step back and have other companies sort of work on their platforms in their ecosystem.
Yeah, so you've been one of the, I'm sorry, I'm going after this easy stuff to talk about, but you said supply chain for Amazon, and I think, yeah, core competency, that's, if they were to ask 100 healthcare leaders, hey, can we help you with this space? They would probably get a response of, yeah, if you would attack this, that would be great. But I feel the same thing's true on the consumer experience side with Apple. And, you've been one of the early adopters for Apple, one of the early supporters of almost just about everything they've done in terms of the watch, in terms of the medical record and the things they're doing, those kind of things. But if we could focus Apple on the experience, on being able to, remove the friction, I mean, I think that would be the area for them. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no doubt in my mind that, the expertise and prowess that they have in, consumer experience and understanding how to sort of delight their customers is something that we could and should take full advantage of. But at the same time, you can't get lost in the fact that, what Apple is really good at, and, my sense of what they want to do more of, is figure out how to apply that to consumer tools. I think the rumors of, Jim Cramer shared with us that Apple was going to buy Epic. I doubt they have, besides the fact that Epic will never sell, as many of your listeners will well know, I don't think Apple has any interest whatsoever in jumping into deep enterprise software space. I think that they recognize their gift is how to serve the consumer. And I think that they're going to add a patina and series of functionality around that frankly, I think their personal health record is a great example of that. And, they'll probably continue to thrive in that area.
Yeah, Kramer's staff should have been, when I read that for the first time, they should have been smacked. All it would have taken was a single phone call to anybody within health IT, and they would say, look, if the leaders of that company, they're not going to sell. That's number one. And number two, name an enterprise application, enterprise software solution that Apple really has done well with. And that has not been their focus since Steve Jobs came back. It has always been on the consumer and on that experience. And what can we do with the consumer? So that was fascinating. All right, let's go back to the show. So let's start with the kickoff. So Chris Ross's kickoff of the HIMSS event, I thought was phenomenal. I mean, he shared about his. I thought it was a great display of leadership for him to take the time in between his treatments on stage 3 cancer to come in and really provide context to the work that we do within the industry. I assume you caught that opening event.
Absolutely. And Chris, a dear friend, I have to say, I was humbled to hear his opening, and I think a great reminder to all of us, frankly, of why we pursued careers in healthcare and why we sort of do what we do. And just frankly, the ability that he had to sort of convey his messages was quite moving.
Yeah, and I thought a great context for the whole show. They have this whole Heroes of Healthcare thing, and to have someone who is a hero of healthcare and is also on the other side right now in probably one of the best places in the world to be receiving care. So he's very optimistic, and we wish him the best, and just kudos on just a phenomenal job kicking it off. But the next thing, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this because, some of our friends are up on stage there talking about, you had Karen DeSalvo, you had Anish Chopra, you had Governor Levitt, Seema Verma. They took the stage and they talked about information sharing within healthcare and how we're ushering in a new era of innovation because of the information blocking rules that CMS had come out with, and including the payer data as well, and now making that available to a consumer-initiated request, but making that available to the consumer. And the premise is essentially that we could now see a whole new generation of data aggregators and people who take that data and data stewards, really, who take that aggregated data and provide intelligence and insight onto it and provide value to the healthcare consumer moving forward. That's the premise. And I wanted to talk to you about the intent and really the impact of that announcement from your seat and from your perspective.
Well, first, I think the impact can't be underestimated. I think it was a big announcement, and it's going to have some big effects in terms of what happens going forward, for no other reason than that, all of those vendors that were on the show floor at HIMSS are probably now going to redirect, much as they did with meaningful use, a large portion of their R&D development and sort of opportunistic time towards meeting those new regs and regulations. And I think that, they're not insignificant, and there's sort of a lot to do. That being said, I think that I'm still trying to digest them. It's 1,000 pages, and I wish I could tell you that I've made my way all the way through it. I paused for a little bit and alternated between reading and skimming and reading and skimming and skipping. Ultimately, I think, I've gotten a little bit of the gist of it, and thankfully, lots of folks have published some really good commentary. But, it's an interesting set of regs. At a high level, frankly, as a consumer, I'm unbelievably pro the idea of making information available. I think it's hard to find folks in healthcare that sort of have a mission orientation and would say that it's their data and they won't share it. I know there's lots that get sort of covered around that, but for most folks, the intention is pretty much there. I think the hard part is going to be, what does it all mean and how do we do it? I always worry about when government regulation is put in place, it has to, by definition, move the needle or move one or two things forward. And it ultimately, can run the risk of unintended consequences as, sort of the implementation finds an equilibrium. So I'll give a couple of examples. When, in the regs, they talk about releasing all data that's in any certified EMR. That's different data across different EMRs. And by the way, do you really need all of that data? Do you really want all of that data? If you got all that data, would you even know what to do with it? Do you get to a point where maybe too much information is just as bad as not enough information? And so how are we going to sort of translate that and sort of open all of that up? But, as a whole, I think that Cedars generally has tried to adopt the philosophy of we'll make information available anywhere at any time in whatever format you want. What I love in theory about this is that it takes an organization like Cedars-Sinai and says that if our patients want access to our data, and increasingly we're starting to see that happen, then they ultimately have a choice of how they do that. We will provide tools for them to see the data and interact with the data, and hopefully they'll find our tools delightful and want to interact with their data in our tool sets. But if they don't, and they want their own tool sets, or they want to do different things with it, they can take their data and work with that in different formats in different ways. There's some great altruistic ones, like I want to download my data and donate it to science for research. It's wonderful stuff. Some of them I frankly worry a little bit about, in that, what happens when a family member of mine decides to download their data, which parenthetically has a large amount of family history, so indirectly information on me, and chooses to sell their data for whatever purpose the individual wants to use it for, but they're just happy to get the data. Did I really consent to give my data? How does that work? And I think that, we're going to have to figure out sort of some of those things. I'm not saying any of that it should stop us from moving forward, but, I think that the unfortunate part is I think there's a 60-day comment period, and then there's a relatively short implementation period. This is going to be a little bit of trial by fire, and I think we're all going to have to sort of hold on to our hats a little bit as this starts to roll out.
Yeah, it's really complex. The example I always use on this for a government reg is the transparency rules. So transparency rules, you have to publish the prices of things. And I was wondering how this sort of played out. So I hit a couple of sites, and it's not the easiest thing to even find the numbers on them, but they're there. So you find them, and on some of them, you literally download a spreadsheet with 1,000 items on it, and you have to determine which kind of MRI you got to see what the price, or you're going to get to determine what's the price. And I think what people don't really grasp, what a consumer doesn't grasp, what somebody who's not in healthcare and healthcare IT doesn't grasp, is the information that's in that medical record is extremely complex, not easy to digest for the average person, and it's fairly nuanced between this kind of MRI, this kind of MRI, this kind of MRI, and so you can't just say an MRI costs this. Because there's the charge master as well as I do. There's millions of items in there, and the intent of a reg, and then how it gets implemented. I'm sure if you went to Seema Verma and said, "Hey, there's spreadsheets out on people's websites, and they sort of look like this," she'd say, "All right, it's a start." And then we hear this a lot. That's the start. That's not really what the intention was, but that's a start. And I think what you're saying is we're going to see the same thing here with a lot of different interpretations of it and a lot of different implementations of this particular data blocking and sharing reg.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be one of these sort of incremental journeys that people will discover. And I'll go back to Apple because I really do give them lots of kudos for what they did with Apple Health. What we really loved about it, and ultimately the reason why we sort of raised our hand and went first with them, was that there was lots of folks that were asking for their data to quote unquote download it. So we did that a while ago. We made it available on our patient portal. You can go in, you can, again, as I said, hopefully you find the experience on our portal delightful and you want to view your data within there. But if you don't, you can hit the download button and away you go. But if you hit the download button, it was sort of disingenuous because we gave you an XML file. And I don't think patients, wake up in the morning and say, what I really want is an XML file of my data. And so what Apple Health did was it gave you a vehicle to really sort of use it. Yeah, and it was also great because it used, standard-based APIs, FHIR, blah, 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 blah. But, what it really did was it gave the consumers a taste of what they really wanted, which was I want my data and I want it in a usable format that I don't have to figure out how to consume. Somebody has figured out how to sort of give it to me in a consumable way. And I think we're going to have to figure that out with a lot of what's, in sort of these regs and sort of in these pieces. I think that there was a lot of Silicon Valley influence in those regs. And I say that from the perspective of there was a lot of VC-backed companies that I think felt like they couldn't get their applications to get data. And so that became synonymous with patient rights of getting data. I'm not sure those are exactly aligned in what patients are sort of looking for. They might be, but I'm not sure they are fully. And as some of those things sort of play out, it'll be interesting to see what people really want to use. And as you know well, and your listeners know well, what will really be fascinating, frankly, is what percentage of patients really choose to engage in this information and what they really want. I mean, I don't know the national numbers around patient portals, and we can knock them because we can say maybe the patient portals aren't perfect, but that's just part of the problem. Part of this is that patients aren't engaging in some of the information that's available to them. So it'll be interesting to see who are the early upticks of this. And I suspect it's going to be more third parties than it's going to be patients themselves that are after some of these API connectors.
Right, because they're going to make meaning of it, right? So it's the old adage of mint, the mint of healthcare. So it's not like I can't get all of the information that's in Mint from each one of my banks and my brokerage and everything else. But what they're able to do is pull it together, give me one view to it, give me a nice budgeting, charting, and all that other experience. And that's what I expect and hope will happen in healthcare. Not that somebody's getting my entire medical record, but somebody who's helping me with diabetes is, getting that portion of it and presenting the data in a way I can consume it. Because just handing, I'm glad you handed people an XML file. That's a lot better than what the alternatives are. But, it used to be we were carrying around a stack of papers. Then it was, a blue button kind of thing of here's your medical record, which you can't really do a whole heck of a lot with, to hopefully we'll get these data stewards, which are in between the health systems and the payers and the consumers, that can create, just meaning from all this data that can help me to live a healthier life. I think that's the goal of patient-centric interoperability.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the inherent challenge in that, I'll say it this way. When that eventually gets solved, and I am optimistic that we will get closer and closer to that, when we look back on the journey, my opinion is that the ability to get the data, which is really what the announcement was all about, is going to have been the easy part. The really hard part ahead is how the heck are we going to normalize that data and make what is today, esoteric configuration that exists in each of the different systems somehow matching. And, the old joke in healthcare is we like standards so much, we have many of them. But so we're just going to have to figure out how all of that stuff is going to sort of come together. But again, I don't mean this to come across as sort of negative. It has to start somewhere. And so I think that this is a great place. I just hope that it continues to take an orientation that's really about the patient being able to get their information so that they could ultimately be a custodian of their health care. What I worry about, and there's some language in the regs or in the draft regs that allude to this, is there's some real interest in making these APIs right as well. And I think, a lot of that language feels like it was around trying to level the playing field from a vendor perspective. And I'm not sure that was, at least in my opinion, the main effort of what these rules really should have been. I think if they stick to this idea of empowering, enabling patients, I think it will be hard to get too far off track because it's a good true north for us to focus on. But if they start to drift into everybody's system has to be open to everything from a read and write perspective, I start to worry about it. And I just don't know how we're going to maintain not just normalization of the data, but then ultimately integrity of the data as we all have to start to police what everybody is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to shoot, so we do this thing called sound bites, and I want to shoot 4 quick questions to you. I'm looking at our time. We should be all right. So the goal of this is really to have just a quick back and forth. So you have an accelerator for innovation in healthcare that you have at Cedars. It's been widely published and you've had a fair amount of success with it. So you just opened class number 5. Can you give us a little preview of what class 5 is focused on?
So the best part I can tell you is we do not know yet. The most fun part of the way the accelerator is sort of built, especially sort of as life as a CIO, is I spend a ton of time as a CIO picking and being involved with leadership in core systems that, to use shorthand around it, we push back onto the user base. The accelerator is the exact opposite. We have a great team that figures out how to take this massive funnel of companies that are applying to want to innovate in healthcare. We do all the diligence we need to do to make sure that they're all viable opportunities. And then we take those companies and they all present in about a 7-minute video session to a team that we call the selection committee, which is made up of clinicians and administrators and all sorts of folks from in around Cedars. And we just watch them go at it. And when they turn around, they say, I need that. I want to play with that. I get to suspend my normal CIO challenges, and I just get to be in the yes business. And I say, that's a great idea. You should work with them. And so, we really do let sort of the users of the systems, whether it's in the clinical or administrative or business area, really sort of drive what they want to work on and where they sort of see the white space. And so to me, it's the most fun thing.
Wow, so we've seen a lot of different innovation models within healthcare. You have accelerators, incubators, you have internal innovation arms, you have external innovation arms. So you chose the accelerator model. Why did you go that route? I mean, it's exciting what you're talking about because it's pool. I mean, essentially the organization, they're telling you what they want to work on, which is a phenomenal model. But why that model versus one of the other models that's out there?
So first, let me start and say that what we really started with, which was sort of ahead of the accelerator, was we have a rich history of technology transfer and really supporting our faculty and the unbelievable ideas that they have and helping them to commercialize and bring to market those ideas, those solutions, and frankly those sort of health discoveries that wonderful things that have really sort of transformed how healthcare is delivered. The new part is in looking at outside innovation or innovation that was on the outside, recognizing that perhaps we didn't have an exclusivity on good ideas. How could we help those companies really sort of get to the next level? And what we really discovered in talking to them is that the best and the brightest in entrepreneurs were a little bit intimidated by healthcare. Face it, it's a little bit of a black box. It's not really clear exactly what goes on. And, we were sort of scratching our head of why are some of the best and brightest building more social media apps and more games? And there's nothing wrong with social media apps and games. The world probably does need more of them. But wouldn't it be even cooler if we got some of those folks to want to solve not just problems in healthcare, but problems in healthcare for like acute and chronic patients? I don't think we needed another band for somebody who's super well to be even more well and perhaps, beat their personal best in a marathon. Again, there's a place in the world for those things, but I'm not sure that a health system like Cedars needed the help to propel those. So we picked an accelerator because we truly wanted the companies to get this 90-day intense period to accelerate their idea and see what happens. And by the way, for some companies, they realize in 60 days of the 90 days that, oh my gosh, this wasn't a good idea at all. We need to go do something else. And, while it's easy to sort of talk about that sort of, at a high level sort of after the fact, it's painful for the companies to go through. But, they turned around, they told us later, and some of them are our biggest supporters and our biggest sort of mentors in the network that we've built, that they otherwise would have toiled around for 2 years before they figured out it wasn't the right market. Obviously, there's plenty that, we've helped sort of accelerate them and propel them by giving them direct access to, quote unquote, what is the wet lab of Cedars, and they really can sort of understand what they need to do.
So you have an investment. So Summation is your investment arm, and there's, how should healthcare be thinking about their technology investment arms? What's the end game? Standalone entities, new revenue stream. I mean, what's the purpose of the investment arm?
Yeah, listen, I won't, try to sort of share why all of healthcare should sort of think through investment in sort of one way or a different way. For us at Cedars, we were trying to solve a couple of things. Number one, going back to my, story of, the world has lots of social media apps and wellness apps for well people and games and things like that, there wasn't a large amount of early stage VC funding for companies that were going to, solve problems in the chronic, acute, and provider delivery market. And so, one of these things was providing access to capital to let some of these great ideas sort of be there. The second is we absolutely, above all else, consider this to be a strategic fund. And so if we see the next amazing idea, but it's not something that we would use, we pass it on to other folks who are in the business of traditional venture capital or traditional private equity. What we are investing in are things that we know that we're going to use, and not only are we going to use them, we intend or we imagine we would be a fairly large customer of them. I think of the venture fund as an extension of our working capital, just applied in a different way, in a different day and age in terms of how quickly innovation is moving through IT right now. I wish, frankly, that all of our needs can get solved by going to a show like HIMSS and buying the best of the three vendors that has a fully baked out solution that solves all of our problems. The challenge we have is that not all the problems we have match up against those vendors. And so how do you sort of create a market for ourselves? And that's really what we look for the venture fund to do.
Yeah, it fills a gap. So let's shift gears only slightly here, but you're looking at a lot of different companies. You're seeing a lot of different companies. You're up in Silicon Valley. You're talking to people. Where do you see digital really transforming the patient experience, that specific area, the patient experience in the next, 12 to 18 months, let's say?
Definitely blockchain. I just wanted to say that. I think it's going to be in the reduction of friction of interaction. Maybe said sort of more simply, I think it's going to be around service. And I think that, what's happening, and we're seeing it, is that more and more of our patients are sort of expressing to us, listen, the care you provided was wonderful. We are grateful. We appreciate everything that sort of, was delivered to us. But boy, if it didn't feel like so much like the DMV, that wouldn't be so bad. And how could we figure out how to cover some of the service and access pieces that are often the first few steps into the healthcare journey and make those, the trendy word to say is frictionless as possible. But really, frankly, how do we pattern match them to make them the same for our patients as they are on the rest of their lives? And so, we have whole segments of patients that can't remember when they last, if ever, picked up a phone to make a restaurant reservation. They might not want to call to make an appointment. They might want to be able to expect to do that sort of online. We have lots of reasons why that can happen because we have 137 different appointment types, and it depends what your pre-qualifications are and insurance. But all of that stuff, candidly, we have to start to approach as that's our problem. We have to figure out how to simplify that. It will never be as easy as OpenTable, but at the same point, there is a heck of a lot of room between OpenTable and what it is today, calling to make an appointment in the average healthcare system.
Darren, thanks for coming on the show. The first time we met, I think, was on a panel discussion, and I was new into healthcare, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I am not going to be able to do this job. This guy is so smart. I don't even know what I'm doing on this panel. And then we got to sit down and have coffee, and I realized, you were like, hey, my experience is your experience. How can I help you to be successful? And I've always appreciated that. And I'm glad to be able to share just some of that experience and knowledge with our audience. So thank you again for coming on the show.
Bill, you're very welcome. Very kind of you to say, and you have done your own remarkable things in paving the way for us. So I also appreciate it.
Well, thanks. So this show is a production of This Week in Health IT. For more great content, you can check out the website at thisweekinhealthit.com or the YouTube channel at thisweekinhealthit.com/video. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.